Welcome to episode 2 of our YouTube channel. Today's topic is doing business or investment in Australia. Today we have Henry again to assist us to simplify very difficult concept in a layman's terms. Thank you, Henry, for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So Henry, when a lot of people wanted to start a business in Australia or invest in Australia, what tend to be overlooked generally is the purpose and the structure, the appropriate structure for that purpose. Do you agree?
Completely agree. A structure depends on your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our clients, we ask them to know what their purpose is, not only their market and whether or not it's economically feasible, is to determine whether or not you know what you want from your business.
Mm-hmm.
A number of factors does come in play in whatever your business purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
Ranges, I'm sure you know, whether it be how much money is involved, what taxation jurisdictions, personal circumstance, and really what you want out of your business.
Yes, absolutely. And that's this is an area that I spend a lot of time with my clients when they are starting business or investing in Australia, because without a coherent plan, without current understanding of the market, their personal circumstances, as you mentioned, or what their 3-year, 10-year, or 5-year plan is difficult. And what happens with a lot of clients is when they don't take this seriously enough, they end up paying a lot of money down the track to restructure it, and they regret it because of the expenses.
I will say the cost of a restructure is much more expensive than actually doing it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, common structures that we find that people do encounter in Australia ranges from sole trader, partnerships, trusts, various forms of trust, and various levels of companies, whether it be corporations in Australia or foreign subsidiaries or
Branches.
fully owned branches in Australia. Now, all structures have their advantages and disadvantages, and ranges all the way from liabilities, taxation, and personal flexibility.
Absolutely.
What I do find though, the purpose is the key determinant factor on regards to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
You are happy with being, say hypothetically, a car detailer, should we say, operating a local shop in your suburbs, all the way to, say, a innovator of paint technologies who's now working with the likes of Toyota, Dunlop, and multinationals.
Yes.
Every one of these needs a structure, and depending on what you are after, scale, funds, tax, we can help you find the appropriate structure at whatever it is you want to do.
I absolutely agree. In terms of legal, depending on the purpose, the layers of documentations and protection layers that we do in terms of structure as well will vary. And again, it always comes back to the purpose. Another aspect of purpose I want to talk about is the government measures that's available for a lot of clients doing business or investment in Australia. There's a federal level, there's a state level, as well as the council level, local councils, that give great measures or grants program. Notably, renewable energy, agriculture, innovative R&D industries are very commonly funded by the various layers of governments. What do you think?
Brilliant point, actually. I will state this, going back to purpose and structure, just trying to tie it all in. Whatever structure you are in, governments are always willing to support. I will state that when governments get involved, you really, really want to know what your structure is and take into consideration both taxation, investability, tax, and asset protection that you have to consider. It is often overlooked, it is often somehow ignored, but do not be afraid to ask your accountant and your lawyer in regards to what support it is available in both local, state, or federal support. Recently, we initially talked about the Queensland Adaptation Grant, where businesses were able to access up to $10,000 of government funds to support businesses to grow or to survive through or adapt through COVID-related situations. That is an example of a state level support. A federal level support could include R&D concessions where governments encourages you to invest in Australia or key areas of Australia, whether it be through medicinal, agriculture-related technologies, mining-related technologies, any sort of related innovation. Potentially you could get it almost tax-free, and not only tax-free, they actually give you rebates into R&D related expenses you have incurred when you're developing this particular product, whether it be paint technology or a new specialist mining equipment.
Yes. In this aspect, I like to bring this point of taxation, because that's a big factor when you're trying to start a business in Australia or trying to bring a business in Australia. Is compared to the rest of the world, Australia does have a very high tax rate. And a lot of clients ask me is, okay, that it's substantially high. Am I going to make any profit doing everything legally? I always advise them, yes, there's so many ways, provided that you look at long term, not a short term sort of objective. What do you think about that?
Well, everything should be done legally.
Yes.
Otherwise, the police get involved, and that's a completely different ballgame, shouldn't we say? But in all seriousness, yes, you can make money.
Yes.
It comes down to business acumen and the opportunities you utilise, of course. Otherwise, we won't have people like Rupert Murdoch around.
Yes, there's so many legal ways that you can do it. Incentives, as I said, you talked about R&D concessions, that really even the Australian Tax Office does offer to a lot of businesses. Provided that the documentation, the records are there, there should be no issues with regards to it. So don't be afraid. Talk to an accountant and a lawyer with regards to your purpose and your investment ideas. That brings me to another point, which is access to information and being able to view clients' purpose or business objectives in a very bird's eye view. You understand this from personal experiences, I'm sure, where a client comes in, it's not as simple, just one mom and dad fish and chip shop or car detailing, as you said. It's a lot more complicated than a sole trader or a mom and dad business. It becomes a lot more complicated, where they intend to make it into a franchise business, or they tend to, build a business up and sell it within a year, for example.
Yeah.
Depending on that, it's all different, but having the wrong accountant can really mean the difference between paying a significant CGT tax compared to a less CGT tax. In a legal perspective, what we found is the liabilities risk associated with the businesses quite vastly differ depending on the structure that was formed on the wrong, understanding of the purpose.
We always run through what the purpose is and whether or not we always encourage people to come back to us and say, if there is an update, if there is a change in purpose.
Yes.
This actually ties in significantly with the amount of tax that you will pay, whether it be through a restructure or a sale or a new partner or whatever it is. Even a divorce has taxation implications. What I find one of the key considerations, especially around the bird's eye view and the purpose, is always taxation. You have mentioned investing into Australia. Now, the taxation for a car detailer is much more simple than a large conglomerate from overseas. This comes into always into our purpose. You mentioned the tax rate. I'll go into a very specific example. As a sole trader, you potentially can pay a lot, maximum tax rate of 45% in Australia. But depending on your purpose, if you never intend to take the money out and always reinvest into the company, we probably will not recommend a sole trader business. That way you can potentially save quite a bit of tax. What I mean, a real marginal difference in taxation. I mentioned overseas investors. Depending on concept of control and jurisdiction, it depends on where you are placed and how you want the funds to be used. We may find tax savings through double taxation agreements, tax credits that you may be able to use where we can reduce effectively your overall tax burden in both countries. Overall, rather than just saving in Australia, but may not say save in Korea, simply because of whatever business structure you do.
Yeah.
To me, that is something that you should always discuss with your accountant. Always the purpose and how the tax impacts you. And look, especially for overseas investors, the concept I find that is also a key consideration is the concept of tax jurisdiction and the level of control you have in Australia.
As well as cash flow.
Big impact.
Initially is how is the funds coming in? So we'll just touch on this lightly just because of the sensitive nature of the topic. Is every country has different requirements, compliance, regulations with regards to bringing certain amount of money into another country or taking money out of the country. Make sure that you speak to your accountant, local as well as Australian accountant and lawyers to make sure that you're compliant with it. Sometimes the financial institution may request for you to provide documents such as sales agreement, joint venture agreements, or investment contracts to really say, okay, is this the purpose that you're specifically requiring that $1 million for? And I get a lot of requests from clients to provide those copies to the financial institution to explain the transaction so that can be released, the funds could be released from the institutions.
We have similar situations where funds were transferred from overseas. They usually request details of what are these funds?
Yes.
It could be a loan from, let's say, from
a
family member, or it could be for a conglomerate, maybe a transfer of funds from head office. It doesn't matter what it is, usually they will ask. If they ask, you must provide documents and support. That could be as simple as a bank statement, all the way to
director's resolution, to just a simple transactions, joint ventures, MOUs. So it really depends. Just make sure you talk to the right professionals. In talking about the cash flows is also, you talked about the control, as well as frank dividends that they need and
tax
credits. One thing people forget is, as much as coming in is important, make sure you're compliant. When you're going out from Australian business or investment back to wherever it is that you tend to take the money back, people think, if it's overseas, I won't be taxated because I'm a foreign tax resident, and usually, conveniently, some of the companies are in tax havens like Virgin Islands, or various countries that offer great tax incentives. There's a lot of misconceptions around and misinformation.
There is the concept of foreign residence, overseas tax residency, and I guess money transfers to more favorable situations is a big factor.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost say that I could keep going and going, but the concept around that is concept of tax residency and control. This applies to both individuals and large corporations.
Yes, even listed companies, and I think
especially listed companies.
Listed companies, and in the legal aspect, that's what we call jurisdiction issues, where can you prove otherwise where the actual business is being occurred or actual benefit is resulted at the end? Is it in Australia or is it overseas? So it's definitely, that's something you need to have a discussion before doing it, because with ATO being more prevalent about overseas control, jurisdiction issues, and where the funds actually, the frank dividends or profits are being ended up in which countries or companies are being targeted.
It is increasingly being targeted, it is increasingly being expanded upon. The concept of jurisdiction is a very tricky subject.
Yes.
In traditions past, especially for corporations, traditionally it says they will determine if whether or not you're an Australian or non-Australian simply because where your company was incorporated. If you're incorporated in Australia, you're most probably an Australian jurisdiction tax company. If you're not, but you operate a business in Australia, in such situations, if your central management or your shareholding is predominantly in Australia, you are classified as an Australian.
Yes, and the following link here is to a case that really has become very notoriously known in Australia, and has flipped our sort of understanding of what jurisdiction and control is in terms of foreign companies.
Effectively, this particular case, Bywater case we call it, really turned heads in the sense that it is not incorporated in Australia. It doesn't have shareholders in Australia. It doesn't have control in Australia. It only has a representative in Australia. Even with all of that, they classified it as an Australian company simply because the Australian representative made all the key decisions. Now, I won't bore you with all the technical details, but in effect, ATO will overlook whatever documentations and natural jurisdictions you may have, irrespective of wherever it is, if the decision was only rubber stamped and silently approved or encouraged by this particular Australian representative. Now, in this particular case, it is now paying Australian tax.
Yes.
So the concept of tax credits does not apply because you cannot flow tax credit overseas from a non-Australian registered company.
What was staggering for me legally for this case is that the fact that the documentations were quite well documented, yet it failed to prove them as being non-foreign tax resident.
It is a case where substance has taken over form. Despite all the directors meeting overseas, being from overseas, it is living in overseas, and the shareholders also live overseas and is incorporated overseas. Everything was overseas. The only Australian link was this particular person, but they deemed that this particular Australian person made all the key decisions, and the foreign directors simply agree to it, defer to his judgment, and therefore do not really make any real decisions despite all the directors' minutes, all the resolutions, all the shareholders' meeting. They see it as in, you don't really make decisions overseas, you made it here.
And it's talk about the jurisdiction legal requirements, which probably in this case, some of the legal representatives may have failed to sort of foresee that, is if there is any evidence, any record, any documentations to dispute it, that it's not a tax resident or is an Australian resident, it's going to be disputed, like clearly said in this case.
Correct.
Hence, again, brings back to the purpose being really important, having a professionals, whether it be accountant, lawyers or financial advisors, really being involved in your business in all aspects, understanding 360 degrees of your business to provide that advice, because without having understanding on all aspects, overseas tax, how overseas jurisdiction laws work, this case could be you, technically.
It could be, it could very well be.
Yes.
Hence, very, very important that you have that initial discussion and with your trusted advisor, whether it be your lawyer or your accountant, wherever this person may be.
Yes, and through our website, MYG Legal website, you can book in for a free 15-minute consultations with us, where we have offices in Sydney and in Brisbane who are willing to speak to you. Don't be afraid to discuss your business ideas or investment ideas. Nothing is stupid. Nothing will be ignored. We're very highly professionals who would take into everything and would never doubt it, how absurd or abstract the ideas may be.
No idea is a bad idea. It depends on what you want to achieve from this idea of yours and whatever the business goal is. We have assisted anyone and everyone from small mum and dad businesses to large corporations who wants to come into Australia and are already operating in Australia. I encourage you, if you want, we are happy to chat initially with your business idea and see how we can help.
Yes.
Compliments on that.
Yes, and definitely Bentleys do great that, and they have various experts within their internal organizations with various experience, specializations. They can definitely provide that bird's eye view that we are very supportive of and an active member of. To do that. So thank you so much for viewing our episode today. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay informed about various aspects. Next week we'll be dealing with various other topics that's key considerations in that needs to be taken when doing business or investment in Australia. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed our episode.